Welcome to Gwinnett County Public Library. Thank you for joining our Meet the Author series. My name is Amy Perry, and I'm an adult services specialist here at the library. We are excited to have Stacy Willingham join us. Stacy is the New York Times and best-selling author of Flicker in the Dark and her newest book, All the Dangerous Things. Before turning to fiction, she was a copywriter and worked in the marketing field. Stacy earned her BA in magazine journalism from the University of Georgia and her MFA in writing from the Savannah College of Art and Design. Please welcome Stacy Willingham.
Stacy, thank you so much first for joining us this evening.
Yes, thank you for having me.
And I want to give you a big congratulations on your second book now.
Thank you.
It just came out just over 2 weeks ago, correct?
Correct. Yes, January 10th. So yeah, 2 weeks ago, exactly.
Right. And so you've been on your book tour.
I have.
And launching that. And so how are things going? How does it feel to have your second bestseller book out?
Oh, it feels amazing. Yeah, it's great. Really, this week is things have finally calmed down, and I'm starting to feel normal again because I had my tour launched the Sunday before the book came out, so it was at January 8th, and then I was on the road from the 8th until the following Wednesday maybe, and then last Thursday and Friday I was just kind of getting caught up on emails and things of that nature. So this week I'm finally back in my office and writing again. But it's great. I still pop into bookstores whenever I can just to see it on the shelves.
I'm sure that's probably a very amazing feeling to see that. Probably a little bit still surreal, perhaps.
Very much so. Yeah. Very surreal. It's, it's funny. You writers, we spend a lot of time just kind of in our offices or in coffee shops. And so when we do go out and get to see readers and see the book out on the shelves, it's easy to forget that it's out there and it doesn't just exist on our computer anymore.
Mm-hmm. And that was one of my questions, was when you're writing, sometimes authors say it's you're in such isolation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you get away from that feeling? What do you do?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's funny. I feel like, and I guess I can't speak for all authors, but I do feel like in order to do this as a career, you have to be a little bit of an introvert because you do spend so much time alone and just kind of with your own thoughts. So I don't mind it necessarily. I do kind of like being by myself and in my own head and writing. But I guess I'm a bit of an extroverted introvert. I like to have, social interaction and be around people. So doing things like this and getting to interact with readers and go to events, that definitely helps because I have to get out of the headspace that I was in earlier when I was just writing in order to interact with people and socialize. I also try to prioritize at least a couple times a week writing somewhere in public. So even if I'm at like a coffee shop and I'm not talking to anyone, something about like the buzz of the background noise kind of helps. Getting out in nature. And of course, I kind of talk my husband's ear off as soon as he gets home from work. So all those things help.
And I think I read somewhere that you have a dog also. So does your dog a labradoodle? Was that
Labradoodle? Yeah.
So does your dog do you bounce off ideas with your dog, or is your dog your writing companion? Or
he is definitely my writing companion and my only coworker. It's him and I all day, every day. Yeah, it's funny. I come up with a lot of my story ideas walking him around the neighborhood because I'm not a plotter. I'm more of a pantser. So I have my idea and then I always just sit down and write and eventually it comes to me. But if I'm stuck on something, like if I'm having writer's block or if there's like a snag in the plot or a hole that I can't figure out, I usually take my dog for a walk. And something about just moving and getting away from the computer screen usually gets the ideas flowing. So he definitely helps me out a lot. And you'll probably hear him barking at some point over this next hour because he's just right outside the door.
Well, it can't be a Zoom call without having dogs
Right.
or children interrupt you. So that makes it
Right.
successful if that happens. Good. So how was writing your second book different from your first one?
Yeah, it was really different for a lot of reasons. A Flicker in the Dark, when I wrote that, I was working in marketing. I had a full-time job as a copywriter and brand strategist. Well, no, actually, that's not true. I wrote that in a prior job. So I was working at a tech company when I wrote A Flicker in the Dark. And so I had to find like these little stolen pockets of time to write. So primarily I wrote for like an hour before I went to work in the morning, usually over my lunch break. I would either go into a conference room or go to a coffee shop and write there while I ate. And then I would write late at night and over the weekends. And so it took me about a year and a half to write the first draft of Flicker. And All the Dangerous Things was different. The biggest reason why it was different is because I'm lucky enough to be writing fiction full time now. So All the Dangerous Things, I was able to spend, all day, every day on it. So I pretty much would write, I would try to keep to kind of normal business hours and write Monday through Friday, like 8 to 6. So for that reason, I wrote it a lot faster. I wrote All the Dangerous Things in 8 months. So about half the time. Yeah.
That's like record time for
it was really fast.
That's crazy.
Yeah, but then I think I got a little spoiled because I'm now working on my third book, and I was thinking it would be a breeze, just like All the Dangerous Things was. But now with the promotion of A Flicker in the Dark and All the Dangerous Things, I have, a lot of travel and events and just all kinds of other things. So this third one is back to taking me a while again. But
and do you have a deadline with the third one? Do you have another deadline? Okay.
It was a couple months ago, but they gave me a small extension. So I'm grateful
that's good.
for that. Yeah. Yeah. But my agent actually I always tell people this when they ask about the writing process for All the Dangerous Things. He gave me really good advice that I like to share is when we sold a Flicker in the Dark, I got a 2-book deal. So I was on the hook for All the Dangerous Things, and I knew it would, be coming out eventually. And he told me to write my second book before my first one ever came out because it would not feel quite as intimidating. He was saying, if you wait until Flicker comes out and the reviews are in your head and then you're, busy with promotion and marketing and travel and events, the words won't flow as easy. So I kind of credit him to why I feel like this book flowed out of me so easily because in that waiting game of waiting for A Flicker in the Dark to come out, I just knocked out this whole book. And
that was good advice then. That was
very good advice.
Good. So authors often say that they had this urge that they knew they wanted to write from a young age, right? I often hear that from different authors and writers. Did you have that feeling that you always wanted to be a writer, or did it come to you later? Or
yeah, I always wanted to be a writer. There was a couple years in college where I kind of went down a graphic design path for a little bit, but I found my way back to writing. And it's funny, you always kind of hear the thing that you're passionate about as a kid that you just do for fun is probably the thing that you're really drawn to. And for me, that was always writing. So my sister actually taught me how to read and write when I was like, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years old. She's
I think there's a picture on the internet of your sister reading to you. It's so cute.
Yeah. So she's a couple years older than me. And she, when she was old enough to go to school and I was still too young, she used to come home and teach me everything that she had taught that day. Like she would play teacher and I would be the student. So she taught me how to read when I was really little. And so I've been in love with reading and writing ever since. And I used to write little like short stories and screenplays. And then in high school, that kind of evolved into a love of journalism. So I was on the school newspaper And I majored in magazine journalism in college. So I thought I wanted to be a journalist or write some kind of like nonfiction book, because I've always enjoyed long form writing. But it was after college, a couple years out of college, I was having a hard time getting a job in journalism. So I started doing copywriting and marketing and doing freelance journalism on the side. And I noticed that all the articles that I was turning in, my editors were like slashing the word count because they were always way too long and way too descriptive. And they were like, this is great, but you only have so much room here. We have to cut out like half of this. And so that kind of made me realize I liked the descriptive creative writing more than the hard journalism writing. And so then I just decided to try my hand at writing a book. So
that's good. So when you were younger, were there any particular books that you really enjoyed to read, or that kind of influenced your style of writing, do you think?
Oh yeah. I loved reading just everything, but I've always been drawn to kind of spooky, scary stories. I mean, I read a lot of like Goosebumps and scary stories to tell in the dark. And I loved Roald Dahl. I just loved all of his books, but especially The Witches for some reason. I vividly remember reading that with my mom, and it kind of scaring me because as a kid, it's a little freaky, but still loving it. So that's the one that really comes to mind.
So you always kind of had that scary element is something that you you liked as well.
Yeah. And similarly, I've mentioned this in a couple previous interviews. If you saw that picture of my sister, you've probably heard this. But my parents kind of also raised us on like old classic mysteries. So I grew up watching like Alfred Hitchcock and Columbo and the Twilight Zone. So that's always been my area of interest. Murder mysteries and just kind of
that's interesting because you can kind of see some of that with the detectives in both of your books, right?
Yeah.
So for the viewers who may not have had the opportunity to read All the Dangerous Things, could you give us just a brief kind of synopsis or tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, sure. So All the Dangerous Things tells the story of Isabel Drake, who is a young mother who wakes up one morning to find herself living in her own worst nightmare, essentially. Her toddler son, Mason, has disappeared out of his nursery in the middle of the night while she was asleep just in the next room. And she didn't wake up. She didn't hear anything. She had no indication that something was wrong. So like any mother, she dedicates her life to trying to find him, doing anything and everything to try and find someone who knows something or dig up some clue, including going to true crime conferences around the country to get up on stage and kind of tell his story. So despite all that, though, despite her best efforts, a year goes by and the case is still cold, Mason's still missing, and Isabel has developed a pretty severe case of insomnia as a result, leaving her unwilling to trust really anyone in her life, including herself.
Okay.
And we'll leave it at that.
Yes. Yeah. I have to be very careful.
Yeah.
In my notes, I'm reminding myself, like, don't spoil it. Don't spoil it for them. Right. So in both of your books, I think the setting is so important to the story. And in The Flicker in the Dark, it takes place in Louisiana. And then All the Dangerous Things, it takes place in Beaufort, South Carolina, and Savannah, Georgia. Why did you pick those locations?
Yeah, so I live in Charleston, South Carolina, and I have for pretty much for the last 20 years, with the exception of going away to college for a couple years. And so I live in the South, and I experience the Southern atmosphere every day, and it's so unique. But I also think it's interesting that the South, as a blanket statement, is every little pocket of it is also unique. So the South as a whole is a unique place, but then within the South, all the different sections of it are very different from each other. So I knew I wanted to set these stories in the South, just because it's what I know, and I like just going outside and kind of observing my surroundings. And but I also try to relate the setting, like you said, to the story itself. So with A Flicker in the Dark, for anyone who's not read that, it's about the daughter of a serial killer. And she discovers at 12 years old a piece of evidence that leads to his conviction. And so I liked the idea of the setting kind of mirroring her reality of danger, like lurking in plain sight, but she can't see it. And it's kind of all around her. It's within her own home, but it's camouflaged as like love and protection, her father. And so for me, I kind of thought of the swamp and the bayous, and how if you're in the swamp, it's gorgeous, but there's danger lurking everywhere. I mean, there's creatures all over the place that can hurt you, and unless you know exactly where to look, you don't know they're there. And so I liked Louisiana, and then I wanted her to be in a really small town where everybody knew everybody, because it would be impossible for her to escape like who she is and who her family is. And I came across Breaux Bridge, which is a real town in Louisiana, and I picked it for two reasons. First, the alliteration of the name Breaux Bridge, I just loved. I really like alliteration. I write a lot of it. And then two, it's the crawfish capital of the world, and they have a crawfish festival there every year that I thought was very unique and something I could latch onto. And I got really excited about writing a scene at that festival. And so I picked Breaux Bridge primarily for that reason. And then Savannah and Beaufort, for All the Dangerous Things, are kind of similar reasons. Again, I wanted it to be in the South, but it was just a matter of where in the South made the most sense. And Isabel, our main character, is very haunted. I guess I would say she's haunted by her missing son, and maybe what she did and didn't do to help him or prevent what happened. And there's also a tragedy in her past that kind of haunts her. And so I thought of Savannah. It's one of the most haunted cities in America. So there's graveyards all over the place. There's all kinds of like ghost stories, and these kind of spooky tales that are hovering over restaurants and bars. And so I thought it would be neat to set this woman who's so haunted in a place that's also haunted, because then that feeling would it just kind of like permeates the whole book, I think.
Yeah. And I knew immediately, even before I looked at your bio or anything, when I was reading it, that you were a true low country girl in your description of low country life, because it is very unique. You described so well, the Spanish moss and the humidity, right? There's humidity in the South, but nothing like low country humidity.
Right. Yeah.
And then you even talked about like one little thing about the no-see-ums, the little bugs, like most people don't even call them that. And then I love the description about pluff mud, and how you describe the smell of it as thick as the marsh, and the pluff mud as thick as buttermilk, and the smell of I wrote it down, decomposition, the liquid kiss of life and death and millions of living. I think that is such a neat description, because if you've spent time in the low country, everyone knows what pluff mud is, and that smell is so unique. But if you leave that area, like if you went to school, you said you went to Athens, probably that first visit back to Charleston, that smell, for me at least, when I left and then I came back, I'm like, that is a unique smell, right?
Very, very. Yeah.
But it is so vital for what that community is, right? On our all the living things there, right, is so important. So I just love that description. Any of those of you who are reading the hardback, that is on page 19, by the way. But it's an awesome description. I just think you hit it perfectly for those who may not even be aware of what that area is kind of known for. So
thank you so much. And that is, I think, another reason why I enjoy writing about the South is I've heard from two different types of readers who are also from the South, and they will say kind of like what you've said, like, oh, like this is exactly what it feels like, or exactly what it smells like. And then people who don't live around here kind of feel like they're able to be transported to a different and unique place through the description. So it's a lot of fun because, like you said, it's a very, very unique area down here, and there are so many little things about it that make it unique, like the colloquialisms and the smells and things like that that are just so different.
Right. And you said you like to write descriptive. So it definitely shows
Yeah.
in that you have that. And then this is just kind of a personal. So in both of your books, the word flicker, you actually use very often. Was that done subconsciously, or did you like that word?
Total subconscious. Because I've heard that from multiple people, and I actually just heard it. I've heard it a million times about a flicker in the dark,
Right.
of course. And maybe I just heard it for the first time with All the Dangerous Things a couple days ago. A reader messaged me and they're like, it's in your second book too. And I'm like, what? Are you kidding me? And so maybe because I wrote All the Dangerous Things so quickly after Flicker in the Dark, maybe it was just still in my head or something. But no, it was not intentional. Because we chose the title of Flicker in the Dark because it's a line in the book. And so we just pulled the line in the book and made it the title because it seemed to fit. So I wasn't like retroactively going in and adding that word to the manuscript. It was always there. I don't know. Someone read and told me it's in there like 26 times. And I'm like,
yeah, so
sorry.
I didn't actually count it, but I did have that version on an ebook, and you can highlight certain things. And so I started to highlight for my book club just because I was like, I really like this book, but I can't get over the fact that she keeps using flicker all the time.
Yeah.
And I was an English teacher. So those kind of things, come out they I can see them a lot. And then when I read this one, I was like, wait, she's using that word again. So I thought that was just like, obviously there's nothing wrong with it, but I just was curious of how that word keeps popping up.
No, it's I mean, I've wondered the same thing myself. Part of me is like, maybe because it's a unique word, it's on the title, it's that phenomenon of like you're just aware of it, so you keep seeing it.
Right.
But now I'm so hyper aware of it. I'm searching for it in my third book to make sure it's not in there. I'm like, I'm not gonna put that word in my third book.
Right. Put a little thesaurus on the side just to see what other words you can put in there. Right.
Yeah.
So how do you choose your characters? Like, do you have people in mind and then take their personalities, or is your family afraid that you're going to pick them for one of the killers in the book or something? Or how do you do that?
I personally don't think it's possible to write fiction without injecting a little bit of yourself in the people that in it, because that's your reality. I mean, that's how you come up with ideas, is conversations and witnessing things and noticing things. So, but I will say I've never created a character based on a real person in my life. If anything, I will give characters, if someone in my life has like a funny little habit or a quirk, or if they said something that really resonated with me, maybe I'll make a character say that. Or oftentimes I'll give my characters my memories. So if I have a special memory with someone, that memory will make its way into the book. But I've never made a character based on another person, because I guess for the reason being, it just doesn't, characters have to fit such a specific need, and there's no one in my life that matches that. Like every character exists for a reason. They need to be in the story for a very specific reason. So yeah, I'll take little pieces of people. I mean, I guess the best example is I've had a lot of people ask about a Flicker in the Dark, like, so what's your dad like? And like, my dad is, he's a wonderful guy. He's a nice, happy guy. He's not this scary guy like the dad in a Flicker in the Dark is. But a lot of the memories that I had Chloe have with her father are real memories I have with my dad, because I wanted to put myself in Chloe's shoes and think like, okay, what would it be like to look back on these really happy memories and realize, like, what if they were all a cover up or a lie, or so people will make their way into my stories in that way, but never anything so on the nose that I think people would notice it. Yeah.
Yeah, because I wondered like if your friends and family are just like being very careful when they're around you so that you don't, write things about
Yeah.
them. But
I don't know. I mean, hopefully they don't feel like they have to censor
no,
themselves, because I wouldn't. No, I make them up.
right. Little pieces from each person or random
Yeah.
people that you might come across. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Or people like news stories. Like
Mhm.
sometimes things I see in the news will inspire, like just inspire a character or something. Very rarely, if ever, do people I actually know.
Right.
I
Right.
think especially because writing thrillers, you need people who are, you know, kind of dark and maybe violent, like not the best people. And I'm just not surrounded by people like that,
That's
thankfully.
good.
So yeah.
That's a good thing. All right. So I really like the pace of the book that I think it was fast, but not too fast. Like I think it was just set. I know sometimes when you read thrillers, it is just so fast, you almost miss the details, but I really like the pace of All the Dangerous Things. How did you find, or how do you think you're hitting the right mark of getting that pace for the reader? I mean, in your mind, it might be working, but how do you find that balance that it's going to work?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much, because that is actually something I care a lot about and am really intentional about when I'm mostly editing, in the editing phase. Because to your point, thrillers are oftentimes written in a way that makes them page turners. Just very quick, like punchy, shorter sentences, shorter paragraphs. But because I love descriptive writing so much, that's just not how I like to write. But I'm very aware of the fact that if it gets overly wordy or descriptive, that can really slow the story down, which is why I think you don't see a lot of thrillers written like that.
Mhm.
So, in order to strike the balance of trying to make it a descriptive thriller that I enjoy writing, but also fast paced enough that it feels exciting, it all comes down to editing. So I'll write the first draft however I want to write it, and then when I go back and read a second time, I'll notice if there's long blocks of text. Like if I'm just describing something for two straight pages, and then I'll think to myself, like, this is really going to slow down the forward momentum of the story. So I'll typically take like those long blocks of text and just cut them up so I can use them in various parts of the story. So if I have like 2 pages of description about the marsh, for example, I'll use a paragraph here and then another paragraph in the next chapter and then another paragraph a couple chapters later. So I'm keeping the same description, but I'm just dispersing it. And then in between those descriptive passages, I'll have like action or dialogue, because that's what picks the story back up. So I do try to do that intentionally, because I do worry about, I don't want to bog the reader down with too much. But since that's what I like to write, just how I like to write my stories. So
Yeah, it felt very natural. I think reading it for me, it just, like I said, the pace was just so, I think just spot on for me, the
thank
pace
you.
of it. Um, but in All the Dangerous Things, I noticed, like many authors do, you have the present of what's happening, and then you go into the past. And I think
Hmm.
that we see that often. But you had another unique twist on it where Isabel, the main character, is also dealing with two extreme differences in her sleep patterns. I won't try to give it away
Hmm.
too much, but
Yeah.
was that difficult to write, or how did you know that you wanted those two extreme sleep patterns?
Yeah, yeah. So actually, I don't really mind. I don't consider this a spoiler, because I feel
Okay.
like you learn pretty quickly what's going
Okay.
on with Isabel. So yeah, so I'll speak openly about it. I'll say,
Well, you're the expert. So
okay, yeah, because I would say in the first 3 chapters you kind of understand what's going
right.
on. Isabel is an insomniac. She hasn't slept properly in a year, but when she was a child, she was a sleepwalker. And so she understands to your point, the two different sleep patterns. And I did that intentionally because it kind of stems, it's a long story. I could tell it if you're interested, but I had a personal experience with my husband talking in his sleep one night, and he said something like a little odd. And I wouldn't call myself an insomniac, but it takes me a really long time to fall asleep. And I was thinking about how he is such a deep sleeper that he can talk in his sleep and do things without his own conscious
Mm.
permission. Whereas I awake at night with my mind wandering. And I was thinking about how we're so different in that regard, and how if either of our sleep patterns got to an extreme, it could be really bad. So, for example, if his deep sleep got bad enough and he turned into a sleepwalker, you're essentially losing control of your own body when you're sleepwalking, right? Like, you're saying things and doing things without your own permission. You can wake up and there's things moved in your house and you don't know if you moved them or if someone else was in there and moved them. I mean, it's really unsettling. But an insomniac, if it gets as bad as Isabel allows it to get, and if you haven't slept an entire year, you're basically losing control of your mind at that point. You can't trust your own instincts or memories or anything like that. And so I kind of got to thinking, like, what would be worse, losing control of your body or losing control of your mind? And what if
Mhm.
one character experienced both? She had kind of learned not to trust either. And I
Mhm.
thought that was an interesting concept, because I don't know, I've read quite a lot of sleep thrillers featuring one or the other, but never
Mhm.
both. So
Right. Yeah. I thought that was very unique, and it just it played well, because as the reader, kind of like, well, wait a minute, what is she thinking, and how was that just a memory? Was that just what she thought she did? Or right,
yeah,
there's that question throughout, every chapter of,
yeah.
what is really happening, right? So what is your favorite scene or favorite part of all the dangerous things?
Oh man. My favorites. I really loved writing Margaret. And
Hmm.
Margaret is Isabel's little sister. And in the flashback past scenes, Margaret and Isabel spend a lot of time together. And I don't know why, but I feel like out of every character in the story, Margaret's my favorite. She's just so sweet. And so yeah, I loved writing about their relationship and showing it. I think maybe because I mentioned my older sister before. We're really close, and All the Dangerous Things is dedicated to her. And she was always very protective over me and kind of let me tag along when I was a kid. And Margaret and Isabel have that relationship too. So writing their relationship was really special to me, and writing about like all the ways they would play together in this big old house that they grew up in, I really enjoyed. I think specifically there's a scene that just immediately came to mind of the two of them having a tea party in their backyard. And I don't know why, but that I just had a lot of fun writing scene because I feel like it set the tone for the setting and it established their relationship. And it's the kind of thing my sister and I would do as kids. So yeah, those chapters are probably my favorite.
Good. So, excuse me. Without giving anything away, did you always know how the story was going to end?
Yes, yeah. I don't plot my stories, so I never know what's going to happen in the middle. But at any given point, I have handful of story ideas kind of bouncing around in my head, and I feel like what the thing that gets me excited enough to sit down and dedicate multiple years of my life to a certain idea is if I get the twist, or if I think of an ending that I think is surprising and satisfying and thought-provoking. Then I decide, like, this is the story I want to tell. So with both A Flicker in the Dark and All the Dangerous Things, I had the plot, like the main idea, basically, the the what if question that the whole book is aiming to answer, and then I had the twist. And so for me as a pantser, I guess I just need to know where I'm going. Like, if I am starting at chapter 1, I don't know what the next 50 chapters are going to look like, but I know what the last chapter is going
Mm,
to be. So I just have to fill in the middle, basically.
right. Um, so what's next for you? You said you have a third book you're writing.
Yeah.
Anything beyond that, or is that enough on your plate for
Yeah.
now?
Oh, yeah. There's more. So I'm writing my third book right now, and that'll be out in 2024. I don't have an exact month yet, but it will be out next year. And it's kind of my take on a dark academia book. So it's another psychological thriller, but it's set on a fictional college campus in the South, in South Carolina, I think it's going to be. And so I'm really excited about it because it's the most different book I've ever written because it features much younger characters. So of course, their motivations and things like that are different. And then I have another 2 books with my publisher Minotaur, so that will be my third in 2024, and then I will have a fourth probably in 2025, but I'm not even thinking about that yet. So
Wow, that's
yeah,
a lot. That's
yeah.
exciting
Oh
and
yeah,
probably very nervous and a whole bag of emotions probably on that. Yeah.
yeah. I'm mostly exciting. I mean, I have my ideas. It's just a matter of finding the time to sit down and get them on paper.
Right. Now, do you tend to write in the morning or in the afternoon or the evening? When is your best time for writing?
Um, typically typically in the morning, I would say, but not I'm not as I'm trying to be more of a morning person. When I say morning, I'm not talking like 6 a.m. I'm talking like 9. So I start writing around 9. And then I write the whole day until my husband gets home from work and we, spend time together and eat dinner. But I would say I hit a slump around like 2. So
Mhm.
anytime from like 9 a.m. until like a little after lunch is when I'm the most productive.
Now, when you're doing other things, not with writing, like you said, you like to take your dog out for a walk or something like that, and an
Mhm.
idea pops in your head, do you try to rush and get it down? Do you try to like mentally take those notes, or what's your best way of keeping that?
Yeah, the notes app in my phone is like the most chaotic peek into my brain because I every time an idea comes up, I jot it down in the notes app on my phone because so many times I've made the mistake of just being like, "Oh yeah, I'll remember this later," and then I never
Never
remember
do
it.
it.
So, yeah, so there's everything from like full chapters that I just jot down on the go, or just like bullet points of things, or
Mhm.
yeah, it's all in there.
That's good that you all have it on your phone. I have pieces of paper everywhere of things I need to do, and then that's not successful either. So,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
It's just, a matter of convenience, I think. I always have a pen for signing books and things. I rarely have paper on me, but I always have my phone. So
Right.
it's just what I can grab.
Right. Well, Stacey, I'm going to turn it over to our viewers, and if they have any questions, they're going to put them into the chat. And we do
Okay.
have a few coming in now. I'm going to go up to, I'll just put them in order. So we have one question. Where did the title, All the Dangerous Things, come from?
So that one, it's funny, both of my A Flicker in the Dark and All the Dangerous Things neither of them were the original titles of my books. Titles often change. And All the Dangerous Things was originally called Hush Little Baby, actually.
Hmm.
Which was yeah, I liked it a lot. I thought it was really a little dark and creepy and a nod to both the nighttime atmosphere and the missing child. But we I'm trying to answer this question without giving away spoilers. It's I guess there's a lot of dangerous things that take place in the book from coming at Isabel from like a variety of places. And there's a line in the book that talks about when she's talking about people never think about what happens at night. Like when we tuck ourselves in bed and turn off the lights, no one ever thinks about the dark and dangerous things lurking outside. And so originally the idea was all the dark and dangerous things from that line, but it was a little long and wordy, so we cut it.
Good. Okay. The next question is, do you consider yourself a regional writer in the style of someone like Flannery O'Connor?
That's a good question, and I also think that question came from my uncle. So hi, Uncle
Yeah.
Ken. I don't know. That's a good question. I would say yes, just because right now I do write very books that are set in a certain region. Um, but I don't necessarily want to box myself into that because I do have story ideas that are not in the South. For an example, I can give a very brief example for the idea I have for my fourth book is there's quite a bit of the fourth book idea I have that's set in the desert. So, so I don't know. I mean, I don't think I'm gonna only write stories in the South. So maybe not. But as of right now, I would say maybe. Yeah. I mean, definitely I think I'm described as a Southern fiction writer.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, that often comes up with your name. If you Google your name, it does come up
Yeah.
that. Another one of our viewers says, "I do hope you include the word flicker in your next novels." Whoops, and it just flicked, so I can't see it. Okay. Um, in your next novels as a wink for your
Wink.
fans following your career. Even it shows up once in the last chapter. So
Okay, I'll do that. I'll throw it in there once for
that's
you
kind of
guys.
like your trademark word now.
Yeah, yeah. Totally
Yeah,
unintentionally, but
right. Well, everyone's going to be looking for it now in your next novels. All right. All right. Another question is, will any of your books be brought to life in a TV series or movie?
hopefully, I mean, fingers crossed. So, A Flicker in the Dark was, as I'm sure some of you have seen, was optioned by Emma Stone and her production company in partnership with HBO Max, and unfortunately, that option has expired. So that happens. I mean, basically, the way it works is they option it, and if they can get their ducks in a row within a certain amount of years, then it'll they'll buy the rights and it'll move into production. But that wasn't able to happen this time around, which is completely fine. Again, it's very normal. So as of right now, there's no immediate plans for either of the books to be produced, but who knows? Maybe in the future.
You need to get working with your SCAD alumni and get them,
That's
Which
not a bad
is that there's
idea.
always students that are looking for
Yeah.
film. I mean, it might not be on the big like HBO Max or something like that, but there's some really big talent right there in SCAD, right? So,
Yeah, no, you're
or
very right.
or come this way up to Atlanta, right? We've got all the film studios here as well. All right. We have another one. I think it's from your uncle again. Would you write a series if you had a good character you liked to follow in several books? Oh, yeah.
That's also a good question, and one I've been asked a good bit. And again, I don't want to say never because, but the way my brain works right now, I think, is I have so many ideas for books that I'm excited to write. By the time I get to the end of one book, I'm kind of excited to move past it. I mean, as much as I love A Flicker in the Dark and All the Dangerous Things, you read your own book like 100 times when you're working on it. And so by the time it's ready to be published, I've read this thing so many times. I'm kind of just ready to put those characters aside and move on to the next ones. So who knows? Maybe one day, but I don't really see myself as a series writer just because I don't know if I have the attention span to keep with the same characters for that long.
Yeah, I think that character would have to be so complex that you would need a second novel or third novel to develop it out. But I think that would be
Yeah,
really hard. Yeah.
I've heard some folks. I mean, A Flicker in the Dark could potentially make a sequel out of that, just because I think there's so many characters with either backstories or loose ends that I could continue to explore. But I think it also comes down to I feel pretty satisfied with the way I've ended my book so far, so I don't necessarily want to resurrect them. I just
Mhm.
kind of I like how they've ended. So
That's probably a really good feeling too. Like if you're
yeah,
completely satisfied and like that's the end, and yeah.
yeah.
Right. We have a comment from one of the viewers that the comment about the Notes app is amazing. I do the exact same thing. So that was very validating. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's no wrong way to do it.
Right. And another question is, what was your favorite part of publishing your own novel?
Oh man. There's been a lot of really cool parts. All right, so I'll go back to A Flicker in the Dark because that was the first time I experienced anything. I will say the very first time I saw a cover was really, really cool because that's the first visual representation you have of years and years of work. It's, for the longest time, an idea in your head and then a Word doc on your computer. and it's so vague. But then when I got the cover design for A Flicker in the Dark sent over, it was the first time I was like, whoa, like this is it's a book, you know, like it's going to be a book. And then that same feeling, but amplified times like 100, was the very first time I held the hardback in my hand. I mean, I immediately started crying. It was like the second I opened the box, I just started crying because it's this like physical representation of so much work.
Good. Another question was, I've enjoyed your books as audiobooks. How did you decide which readers would be involved with narrating your novel?
That's a good question. So I Flicker in the Dark, when it was time to get working on the audiobook, they my publisher, Macmillan Audio, their audio division, sent me probably like 6 audiobook narrators who read a couple chapters in auditions, basically. And I got to listen to all of them and choose which ones I felt kind of embodied the book the best. And then I got to give them some tweaks, then some notes, I guess. So the first example that comes to mind, and probably the best one, is even though my books are written in the South, I wanted a more neutral sounding voice because I think sometimes that could come across as distracting. And like kind of my point earlier about the South, like all the different pockets of the South are so different. A Louisiana accent is so different than a Savannah accent, and it's hard to nail it. And so I just kind of wanted to stay away from that. So all that to say, we found Carissa, and she responded really well to the feedback and my notes and things like that. And so she did such a good job with A Flicker in the Dark. We used her for All the Dangerous Things too. So she, so far we've just had the one narrator. She does all the voices, the past, the present, the men, the women. She's very good.
Would you would you ever consider narrating your own books?
I don't know. The idea of that is pretty cool, but I also think audiobook narration is such a specific skill that I don't think I could do it justice. A good audiobook narrator makes you forget that you're listening to an audiobook. You know, you just get lost in the story, and I don't know. There are other people out there that have better voices than I do. So
and so when you're traveling, or when you're just in your off time, when you're not a writer, when you're just Stacy, what kind of music or books or things do you enjoy listening to?
Yeah, it's funny. I read a lot of thrillers. It's when you set out to start writing a book, you kind of, at least for me, I wanted to write the kind of thing that I enjoyed reading. Like, what's the kind of book that I wish there was more of? And that's like highly descriptive thrillers, psychological thrillers. So that's typically what I try to read. But I do need a break from the thriller genre every now and then. So I read and listen to, I like memoirs and nonfiction. I like historical fiction, actually. I like World War II fiction quite a bit. I'll read pretty much anything. But I do tend to gravitate towards thrillers, and I like horror a bit. Back to the scary stuff. I kind of just like being scared.
So could you recommend a book that you've read recently?
Ooh, gosh, yeah. I've read, let's see. I just finished Everybody Knows by Jordan Harper, which was actually a little bit different than what I typically read. It's a thriller, but it's more like crime noir, definitely more crime, like a police procedural sort of, more than a psychological thriller. But it's basically about a PR, like a PR professional for celebrities out in LA, whose job it is to like bury their secrets. And when they do all these terrible things, she twists the story in their favor. And so it kind of goes into like the seedy Hollywood stuff that goes on in LA. And it was very good. It was written very well. So that one really sucked me in. I read it in like a day. And I also just finished The House in the Pines, which is obviously getting a lot of attention right now. I thought it was good. It had a really unique aspect to it that I don't see in thrillers very often. So
Good. So we had one more comment come in. It says two, excuse me. I guess I love reading descriptives because I love your writing style and all the dangerous things. That's a really nice
Thanks
comment
so
from
much.
Jill.
Yeah.
And with writing and working a full-time job, were there times when you felt you needed a break from writing, or did you feel you were able to find a pretty good balance?
I think I eventually found the balance, but I do think yes, I needed a break sometimes. And sometimes I feel this is why I try to tell writers, anyone who's writing a book or trying to get a book published, that there is no right or wrong way to do it, because I used to get pretty I would get kind of down on myself seeing advice like you have to write every single day or knock out 1,000 words every single day, because sometimes that's not sustainable. At least for me, it wasn't. So most days I would write in the morning before work, or write at lunch, or write at night. If a whole week went by and I didn't do any of that, I would sit down at a coffee shop on Saturday and write for 5 hours. Like, I think you just have to find what works for you and prioritize it. Like, if your goal is to write a book, prioritize your goal and get that done in whatever way you can. But I did used to get kind of down on myself, thinking like, I don't want to write every day. Like, some days I just don't feel like it. And I think that's fine. I mean, I don't write every day now. I'm on deadline. Sometimes I have to, but sometimes I'll go a couple days or a week without writing a word if life gets in the way, or if I just am not feeling it. So I think that's fine.
Mm-hmm. And then we have another question. Your favorite writer of all time? It's totally okay to say yourself.
Oh man. Well, it's definitely not myself. There's a lot of really good writers out there. All time is so hard, because what I love about reading and writers is everyone has their own style. And so sometimes it's hard to compare them. But I'll say that the writer that inspired me the most is Gillian Flynn. Because when you talked about the pacing earlier with the descriptions and the fast-paced kind of action of the books, she does that so well. And everyone knows her obviously from Gone Girl, but Sharp Objects and Dark Places are equally as good. And she was the very first thriller writer that I ever read that made me realize you can write a wordy, descriptive thriller, and you don't have to sacrifice like beautiful prose for a fast-paced plot. So I think reading her books made me realize there's different ways to write a thriller. And she's just so wildly talented. She's just like my role model, if you can't tell.
Okay. And earlier you had mentioned that you, when you were younger, you enjoyed the Goosebump series of books. That I've heard is becoming again very popular with that generation that read it. Would you ever consider writing an adult version of Goosebump series?
Ooh. I don't know about specifically that, but I've always been a little bit interested in writing a thriller with a bit of a supernatural element to it. I guess the best thing, like the best comp I can think of, would be like Simone St. James. If anyone has read her books, she's the Sundown Motel and the Broken Girls, and what's her most recent, the Book of Cold Cases. She writes thrillers, but there's a little element of like a ghost story in there, and I'm pretty interested in that. So maybe one day I might do something like that, but the idea hasn't come to me yet.
Okay, good. Well, Stacy, we are almost out of time, but we have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation with you.
Yes, me too.
We are looking forward to your third and fourth and many more books, and we hope you will consider doing another talk with us, maybe in person here at the Gwinnett County Public Library.
Yeah.
But again, Stacy Willingham, her newest book, All the Dangerous Things. It's available at your local bookstore or at your favorite library. So thank you all for joining us this evening. And thank you very much, Stacy, for joining us. And we look forward to more of your great writing soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And thank you all so much for listening. I had so much fun.